Uh, I'll call the meeting to order and invite everyone to rise and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty
and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll start with the agenda approval. Is there anything from staff on the agenda?
No.
Changes? Any changes from council, additions, questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved, Anderson.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, commission representatives tonight are Jeff Dickman from the Planning Commission and Sharon Meister from the Parks and Trails. We'll start with open forum. Is anyone here to speak at open forum? If so, press *9 on your phone and Jessica will get you.
Yep. And Mr. Mayor, we have a new feature this meeting as well. So Jessica, if you want to describe the video option as well, please.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor and Council. Folks can also participate by using the raise hand function. If they're watching on video, they can click on, if they're on a computer, they can click on participants. And then once you've clicked on that, you can use the raise hand function in the right-hand corner. Otherwise, if you are on a tablet or a smartphone, you can utilize the more function at the bottom of your screen, which is the 3 little dots. I would note that we have muted folks' videos and we'll have them speak. It does look like we have a few hands raised. So whenever we get, we'll go through here with our first 4 folks.
Jessica, I should have mentioned this earlier. This is open forum section of the meeting. We have further times to speak as agenda items come up. Typically, this is for items that are not on the agenda. We have opportunities to speak at unfinished business, new business, planning business, all those items. However, I said that too late now, so people obviously have their hands raised, so we can certainly bring them through.
Yeah, so just be aware, everyone, that you will have plenty of opportunity to speak as the meeting progresses. So.
Perfect.
So we have some.
Yes, we have 4 folks with raised hands. I think the first person will unmute at this time will be Sarah Jane Nichols. Sarah, you're unmuted. Could we get your name and address for the record?
Yes. Should I make my video show or is that okay?
I can ask to start your video, so you can go ahead.
Okay. Hi. I am Sarah Jane Nichols, and I live at 6334 Steeplechase Lane.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I live in the Ravinia neighborhood, and most of the people in my neighborhood have been here less than 2 years, and so are new to council meetings and new to this process. And as you all are aware, I'm sure there's a lot of big changes that are coming to Corcoran. Eaglebrook has proposed a megachurch location adjacent to my property and the property of many others in my neighborhood, as well as another development has been proposed, Tavera, which is just down the road from us. So there's just a lot of really big changes that are coming to Corcoran and specifically impacting Ravinia residents. And I know later in the agenda there is going to be discussion about a vacancy on the city council, and I would just like to take this opportunity to please ask the council to consider an application from someone living in the Ravinia neighborhood, just so we're able to have representation on the council. We're a very large part of the Corcoran community, and we're excited to be here, and we'd really like to be a part of the process and have a seat at the table. So I would just really ask that the council would consider an application from someone in our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Next, we have caller, the last 4 digits ending in 8753. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and if you can state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Greg Hoagland. I'm at 19220 Hackamore Road. Couple things. This first one is directed, I guess, at staff or the city council, but I've voiced this in the past. We are out in a land with no high-speed internet, and you guys put forth a 75 meg document with 499 pages to get to the call-in number. I don't understand why it shouldn't be prominently displayed on the front page of your website that we're having a meeting tonight and here's the call-in number. It's pretty simple, it's pretty logical, and it basically speaks to you want to put people through a lot of hoops in order to call in or participate in a meeting. So that's question number one, or comment number one. Comment number two is, Mr. Thomas, you're probably the person up there on the council that's been here the longest, but back in 2014, the minute the Ravinia neighborhood was improved, you bonded and spent taxpayer money to put a sewer line up to downtown Corcoran. And I know in some double secret work sessions, you've entered into an agreement with St. Therese Church, which would be a foundational part of this downtown Corcoran, and would you're also selling our city-owned land as part of that transaction. Can you give us all an update on the St. Therese project? They've been in the news, have been hammered pretty good on PR, and my hypothesis would be that that deal is going to not happen. It is proper that you would update the citizens of Corcoran on the status of that transaction, what the terms are, if it's happening, not happening. Now, I also know you're probably not going to respond to that, so maybe a council member would have the courage to do it. And then lastly, in that vein, you've got on your vision statement that Corcoran will become a vibrant community focused around a thriving town center. Unless I'm wrong, I haven't seen one change to that thriving downtown in 6 years in the middle of a great economy and a changing economy right now. And could somebody update us on if there's a funnel of businesses that are interested in coming to your downtown, and or who owns or who's the DRI up there at the staff to attract a business? Because we certainly know you've went after the existing businesses like Westside Tire and others for their nuisance behaviors and what have you. But I think you owe the citizens of Corcoran some type of update on your thriving downtown and what kind of ROI are we getting on the millions of dollars that we spent, and what's a realistic timeline when some new development might come in there? Is it 3 years, 6 years, 10 years? Because I haven't seen one change, and that's your vision. You guys spent our money, and it's great when you're spending other people's money, but you should be accountable to give us a little update. And if Ron doesn't want to update us, maybe somebody on the council could tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think typically we don't comment on these, but I just want to give a couple of quick notes on this as opposed to Mr. Hoagland's beliefs. I guess the bonding we did for downtown came out of our TIF funds, and it was money spent to put sewer into a bunch of failing systems in the existing businesses down there. It's been the point of it was to help increase the tax base of existing businesses. The thriving downtown vision is going to be based on getting rooftops in Corcoran in order to get retail, which I would think most people who are in development would understand that that's not going to happen until you get rooftops. You just don't get retail until you get rooftops. We knew when we set that plan out that it would be a long-term vision. Many people said it probably won't be in your lifetime, and I agreed with them. So it's moving along the way we expect it to. as pertains to St. Therese status, they're in the process. They've had some issues, internal issues of their own, and there's really no update to give anyone. It's hopefully moving forward, and we wish them the best. And they've got deals. They're dealing with the state to get some clearances and some financing. So there's really nothing to tell. It's a private business. It's looking at doing a project in Corcoran. So anyway, that's enough said about that. Who's the next one?
Thanks, Mayor. The next individual we have on with a raised hand is Jeremy N. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and ask that you say your name and address for the record.
Hi there. My name is Jeremy Nichols. I live at 6334 Steeplechase Lane. I wanted to second the comments of my wife regarding the consideration of the open slot on the council that will be opening up soon. Ravinia is a growing area and it has some unique perspectives and unique needs that I think should be represented on the council. I look forward to seeing somebody from our community get represented at some point on that council. We do have, or at least I have encountered one person who has applied. His name is Manoj Thomas, and my experience with him has been for a number of city issues. And he's got a really good perspective. He's really able to balance the perspectives of different interested parties.
Sorry.
Jerry, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that.
Try this. Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
It's hard to communicate from outer space.
We'll get it.
I think that's better.
My satellite should be approaching orbit for Corcoran soon. Sorry. So my name is Jeremy Nichols. I also live at 6334 Steeplechase Lane. I wanted to add a few additional perspectives to what my wife said earlier about the request to have somebody from the Ravinia area be considered for the open slot on the council. One of the people that I know has applied, his name is Manoj Thomas. I've worked with him a little bit over the past couple of weeks as we've been in dialogue about some of the new developments happening in Corcoran. And my experience with him has been that he is very thoughtful and is relatively new to the area like many of us are. He's really established connections in the community. He understands the perspectives of a lot of different people, not only within our neighborhood, but also neighboring communities, businesses, churches, and he's really been able to communicate well with a lot of different people. So I think he would be a strong asset for the council to consider as you move forward to fill that short-term vacancy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the chance.
Okay, next we have Peter Hartz. Peter, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. If you could,
Excellent.
Could get your name and address, please.
My name is Pete Hartz, and I live with my family at 19169 Galloway Circle up in Ravinia. And I also wanted to weigh in on the open council seat. I wanted to put my recommendation behind Manoj Thomas. I've found in the few times that I've worked with him he is a very thoughtful person who seems to be very dedicated to our neighborhood. And I think he would be a fine addition to the council. And I think that his commitment in being a police reserve officer also shows his willingness to be in public service. So that's all I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you. The last person we have with a raised hand is Tom McGee. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Hi there. My name is Tom McKee. I'm in Ravinia as well, 6633 Bridle Path. And I just wanted to reiterate what a few people have previously said about the open council seat, and definitely voice my support for Manoj Thomas. And I think what everyone said about him has been my experience as well, that he would be a great representative for the community. And I hope that he could, I hope he's looked at seriously for filling in the vacancy.
Great.
Thank you.
Nice sound.
Thank you. Anyone else? I don't have any other hands raised. Anyone else at this time? Perfect.
Okay, anyone else? If no one else, we'll move on to the consent agenda, items 7A through F. Well, there are presentation recognitions, there are none. Consent agenda items 7A through F. Does anyone wish to pull any of the items? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7A, B, C, D, E, and F.
So move, Schultz.
Second, bottom.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson. Tom, was that an aye?
Aye.
Bottom.
Aye.
Dejewski.
Aye.
And Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on to planning business, which is item 8A and B, which is a primary plat for Carname addition and the comprehensive plan amendment for preliminary PUD for Tavera. At this point in time, we'll take public comment on these items. If you wish to speak, be recognized by Jessica, and she'll put you on.
Mayor, we do have two folks that have raised their hand at this time. The first is Manoj Phone, and we'll go ahead and unmute you. Manoj,
Hey,
you should be
can you
unmuted.
hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me out now?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. My name is Manoj Thomas. I live in Ravinia. My address for the record is 6552 Carriageway in Ravinia. So I have a comment on part B of those topics regarding Tavera and the exceptions they have sought. I believe development is a good thing, but to put houses like matchboxes over there back to back without the normal provisions under which Ravinia was built. We're talking about the cul-de-sacs, we're talking about the community center, I'm talking about the width and the width of the garages, the space in the back, and things like that. I think that is unnecessary. I think there were comments made by the planning commission in the last meeting that clearly questioned Lenore's intentions behind it. So I would seriously consider or request you to consider not approving it and sending it back to the planning commission to consider the fact that that is going to be a high density area beyond what you want Acomore or the development of that space are built at today. So that's my point about those things, requesting the council to send it back. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Manoj.
Mayor, the next individual we have on with a raised hand is Lisa. And Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And if you could give us your name and address. Lisa? Hi, Lisa. Oh, we cannot hear you. Sorry.
Am I still live? Is that the reason?
Sure.
I am.
Yes.
Lisa, you want to try again? No, I'm sorry. Oh, there we go.
Great.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
I really didn't do anything. All right. Well, that works. So my name is Lisa Weifels. I live at 6730 Horseshoe Bend Drive. And I want to speak about the Carname addition. My husband and I own lot 2 of Rolling Hills Acres, which is directly north of the proposed development. We have lived in a nearby acreage subdivision for 8 years. While we love our neighborhood, we have continually kept one eye open for a larger plot of land that would give us more space and a little more privacy. We were so excited to find our plot because it met every single item on our wish list of our dream property. The major reason why we chose to purchase this land was because we believed it could not be split further since all development rights were used. So we believed we would have one neighbor on each side. With a swamp behind us, there was little chance of houses being built back there. There was also a tree farm across the road, which also eliminated another possible development. So we had a pretty solid buffer to keep us safe from any big surprises like we have seen residents struggle with as these large developments pop up. So when we found out that the preliminary plat was submitted to split lot 3, we were completely blindsided and upset. With this change, we would go from a quiet setting with a rural feel that we had dreamed about to the very likelihood that there would be 3 houses just on the south side of our property, potentially 3 outbuildings and a shared driveway that would basically sit as close to our property as possible and run pretty much the entire length of it. It also means that instead of 2 to 4 cars with a few extras throughout the day, we're looking at 6 to 12 cars up and down that driveway every day, possibly multiple times a day. That doesn't include other traffic for each home, including nannies, friends, USPS, UPS, and all those delivery services, all adding dust and noise. Keep in mind, this was a farm field and there are 0 mature trees. And while we appreciate that Mike Caranini has planted some trees toward the property line, they are 4 to 6 inches tall. And it would be quite some time before they are even remotely helpful in blocking the entire driveway, houses, and everything that would be built over there. We were so confused as to why this was even possible, so I immediately started digging into the city code and development rights, only to find that as of June 4th, which was the planning meeting, the only development rights map had not been updated online. So it was showing the adjacent parcel as still 1. That has since been updated. But once I found that there had been changes made last year to that map, then I dug through meeting packets to find out what happened and why this was done. So most of you will probably remember that the purpose of the changes to the development rights program read as follows from the agenda packet from June 27th, 2019 meeting, and I quote, "Council asks staff to review the development rights program and the open space and preservation plat ordinance to understand opportunities for making it easier for property owners to develop their land," end quote. If the purpose was to help people develop their land, how is it possible for someone to purchase a piece of land, then combine it with another individual's parcel for a moment in time so that on the books, it looks like it's a single plot of land, and that makes it acceptable in the city's eyes to move those development rights? This seems like an abuse of the intention of the program. This same document also goes on to explain the new rules that they had arrived at, and there was an equation was developed to determine the rights, but some problems were noticed. So the document goes on to state, and I quote, "However, the simple multiplication method recommended by staff and council resulted in more winners and losers than originally anticipated. At the meeting, council directed staff to review each parcel and analyze the existing development rights and determine the new development rights on a lot-by-lot basis based on today's lot size and any previous subdivision actions," end quote. So the city went through each parcel to analyze the rights, but it's so odd that 4 entitlements were given to the Carini property, the swamp one, that's landlocked and is mostly swamp and lowland. It also already has a driveway that spans through someone else's property. I tried to play devil's advocate, and I wondered if we just got unlucky and this was kind of just a weird fluke that happened. But I quickly found another property on the corner of Willow and Horseshoe Trail that has similar circumstances. A 36-acre plot was given 4 development rights. Lake Morin occupies almost the entire acreage besides the existing home sites. There is certainly not enough land to support the 3 remaining entitlements. What came out of this new development rights program, as I'm assuming is an unintended consequence, was that it gave people development rights who did not actually have enough buildable space on their land to support those rights, and thus allowing for them to be moved off to land adjacent parcels. I also want to point out that Rolling Hills Acres land was originally split into 3 plots, plus the existing farmstead, therefore following the minor subdivision regulations. But now a portion of that same land would be split again without being subject to subdivision regulations. So now we have would have 5 houses on that same amount of land with no roads or other improvements.
Lisa, I apologize. Just so you're aware, we're past the 5-minute mark. So Mayor, if you're okay to let her keep going, that's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead, but just try and wrap it up as quickly as you can, Lisa. I think you're making good points. So it's.
I was not aware that there was a 5-minute.
No, that's my.
Yeah, we can extend it.
We're
We're extending it for you. So go ahead, but
okay.
Try and make it as quick as you can.
So I'll kind of skip through some of it, I guess, because my husband would also like to speak in a little bit. I think it's frustrating that several neighbors, along with ourselves, have spoken with and expressed concern to various city staff members, but each time we have heard that because it meets all the code, there's probably nothing that can be done about it, even if that staff member has some reservations. My question is, where does the municipal code protect people like us from things that meet the criteria but really don't make sense for the city or the neighborhood? This was purely a profit opportunity with no real regard to other properties surrounding. The fact that Nate has split land on Larkin, he's working on in Greenfield and is now working on this, further supports that notion. Now, I'm not saying that to cast a bad light on him. I don't have a problem with splitting land, but the city really needs to make sure these splits and transfer of properties make sense and aren't detrimental to the surrounding community. Let me pick my other stuff I want to say. Since I guess I just also want to say that we brought up in the commission meeting that the split doesn't match the look and feel of Rolling Hills Road, and it doesn't fit the road character. This was kind of brushed off as an opinion, but the fact that there have been many splits happening along this road, and none of the resulting plots were less than 5 acres, and the majority are around 10. Most importantly, none of them have shared driveway. In fact, there are 0 shared driveways on this road. I guess I had to skip a couple of my things, but just wanted to reiterate that this is not good for the neighborhood and really makes no sense. It doesn't fit with the rest of the road. It feels like it goes against the intent of the development rights program. And I didn't even speak about the major concern of drainage yet, which my husband would like to touch on. If this development is allowed, my husband and I will then have to have a serious conversation about whether or not we want to build our house there, or even if we feel like we need to sell in order to obtain the land we believed we were purchasing. Then we would also have to hope that the land hasn't been devalued because of the increase in density, all for the sake of making a buck. I want to thank you for listening to my a little bit abbreviated version. I hope that you can take this into consideration. If someone else wants to talk next, we've got to switch off with kids. But my husband would like to.
Yeah, I guess on that, we've extended your time on that. I think it's, if your husband has a different subject that he wants to talk on, he can certainly be recognized. But for this subject, we hear you. We certainly understand what you're saying, and you know, we get it. So thanks for your comment. If your husband has a different subject he wants to be recognized for, certainly have him do it with
so
Jessica.
He's not able to speak about this addition?
No, I mean, yeah, we have a limit of time that we'll put on any subject, because you get 10 people in here and we spend an hour speaking about one subject and just be getting the same message over and over again. So certainly if you want to if you want to talk to any of us offline or go into things, it's fine. But you need to recognize that we're dealing tonight with the code that we have in place right now, and that's we aren't going to rewrite our code tonight. So
Okay.
I think you've made some good points on the building rights transfers, and it's a subject that we can take a look at. There's a lot of defense for what we've done and the way we do things. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but if you'd like to talk about it, I'd encourage you to give me a call and we can certainly discuss it. So thank you, Lisa. Is there anyone else who, Jessica? I think you're muted, Jessica.
Sorry about that. We do have two other folks who would like to speak as well. So we can do that. How about we first go with 8753 would be the phone number. You'll go ahead and be unmuted if you'd like to speak now.
Hi, my name is Greg Hogan. I'm at 19220 Hackamore Road. And my suggestion, Lisa, is have your husband call back in *9, especially if he's got some drainage issues. I have watched, I've lived next to Ravinia and been present at every meeting that has taken place over the 15 phases. And I don't think there is a staff member or a council member that has, other than Mr. Thomas. I remember Ron telling us all the night it was rammed through that Lennar was going to be a great neighbor. That was his only comment. And I've watched him over 15 meetings, and you would think maybe there'd be a comment about a turn lane, or could a fire engine come down this cul-de-sac, or the fact that Ravinia proposes 75-foot lots and then changes it to 55-foot lots. You'd think maybe if soil erosion and 9 acres floods your yard, you'd get a comment, you'd get some reaction from our mayor. Nope. You'd think the Tabors, who's had to go through lawsuits to fight easements, would
Hold
get
on a second.
comment.
This is not what
we're talking
public
about.
Comment is used for, Greg. I think you know better.
I've got the.
If you're going to speak directly to the topic, you can go ahead and speak. If you're going to go on a rant of 50 years of Corcoran politics, this isn't the place for it. You've got a forum. You've already used it. This doesn't even involve Lennar.
Yes, it does. B is
This is a different topic.
Lennar. What do you mean? 8B is not Lennar?
What do you have to say about 8B, Greg?
All right, here we go. I was encouraged at the Planning Commission meeting that 2 commissioners had the forthright ability to be concerned about the neighbors. And they voted against the proposed development because they wanted to address some of the neighboring concerns. Having lived alongside a Lennar development and went through hell, I would urge the council, as well as the neighbors that are adjacent to fundamentally ask some questions about drainage, and ask questions about trees, ask everything, because Lennar is a strategic partner of the city. They will have 1,000 homes under construction, and this whole idea that we're preserving the natural character and rural feel of Corcoran is totally false. Lastly, Ron, you live adjacent to this property. It's in your self-interest to improve it. In theory, you almost have a conflict of interest in approving it, but we all know what's going to happen. It's going to be voted 5-0 tonight, and Lennar will be approved, and poor Lisa and some of the neighbors' questions can't even get asked because they're limited for 5 minutes. So I'll listen. Sorry to interrupt your meeting. Maybe you could address some of the neighbors' concerns.
Is there anyone else, Jessica?
Mayor, we do have one other person at this time.
Just for the record, Lisa's comment was not about the Lennar project.
Yeah.
So
We do
doesn't
have
matter,
one.
John.
We do have one additional hand raised. It is for the caller ending in 6618. I'll go ahead and unmute you if you can state your name and address for the record.
Hello, this is Nate Karanimi at 19927 Larkin Road, Corcoran. And I'd like to comment as the applicant for Karanimi Development on behalf of myself, my parents who own the land. And we've been in the area. We live in Corcoran. My parents have lived on this property for 20 years. So I understand some of the new neighbors have concerns, and I think we've been very forthright to say we'd, be happy to discuss any of those concerns just out of being neighborly. In terms of the time frame we have tonight, I'll just be very brief. We've followed all the guidelines and found both the city and staff to be very helpful, and simply looking forward to hearing the recommendations of the council and the decision.
Thank you, Nate. Jessica, is there anyone else?
There is no one else currently with the raise hand function.
Anyone else wishing to make comments? Raise your hand at this point in time, or we're going to.
Yep, you can press *9 or use the raise your hand function on the computer here.
Just there's a chat that came through as well.
Perfect.
Asking how to speak about a topic. So as far as that, right now we're talking about planning business. The two items in the planning business, the Karanimi and the Tavera proposals. And you could press *9 on the phone. Or Jessica, how do you do it on the video again?
Yeah, on the video you can click on the participants button, and then when you get to that, there is a raise your hand function on the right hand side. Otherwise, if you are on a tablet or a smartphone, you can press the three little dots, and that will allow you to raise your hand as well. So we'll wait just one moment here. Mayor, I'm not seeing anyone else who's raised their hand.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on then to item 8A, which is the preliminary plat for the Karanimi addition. Before we get started on that, I assume that Kendra will have a presentation for us, but I want to just speak to the building rate program and in general that the challenge that we have is the goal of the city in the building rights program was to allow people to consolidate building rights and thus preserve a lot of open space. I think Lisa brought up the point that they're maybe doing this with land that wouldn't otherwise be developable and taking advantage of that. Perhaps a valid point and perhaps should be looked at. The issue tonight isn't what our program is. The issue is we have a program, it's in place, and we have to follow the rules and guidelines on that. If the council has an appetite for it, we can at a future date look at our building right transfer program and see if we're missing some things there that they might be showing up. And anyway, having said that, let's move on to the
Mayor, I do have someone who has raised their hand. Would you like me to recognize them at this time?
Okay, let's do that because it's probably confusing on how to get in here. So I'm sure they had to figure it out.
Thank you. So. Lisa is the individual. Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and just a moment here. Here you go, Lisa. You are unmuted if you want to go ahead and speak.
Okay, thank you. This is actually her husband, Andrew Weifels, at the same address as specified earlier, 6730 Corcoran, 6730 Horseshoe Bend Drive in Corcoran, Minnesota. This online stuff, I think you guys should, just as a procedural note, address that sometimes husbands and wives are trying to come to the same channel. So you should give them a chance to speak as opposed to having to log in a separate thing. We're juggling kids to be able to speak tonight. So that's what's going on here. So thank you for answering the hand raised. I know that last time during the Planning Commission, there were some issues with that. So I do thank you for your time. I'm going to make this really short. I know Lisa expressed her thoughts on that. I expressed my thoughts during the Planning Commission. I do ask that the council look at and listen to our thoughts and concerns. I do know, as the mayor was just speaking there, that you guys do have a policy in place, and tonight is not about that policy, but I can guarantee we will be bringing that policy up at a later date, because I do think there's some very large concerns with that policy and how it's been implemented. In my line of work, we look at requirements all the time, and let me just say there's a lot of holes in your guys' requirements. Anyways, what I just want to say is that I don't think with the Carini development, I have expressed a lot about the concern of watershed, and I still haven't seen any plans come to the city yet to address those concerns. It just, maybe the Carini family is working on that, I'm not sure. But I would like the city council to consider that the watershed and what has been expressed and shown during the planning commission's presentation, I don't think is being addressed with the flow and the curvature of the land that's there, and if applying a driveway there as put in the preliminary plat, puts what I'm considering a dam. I know Carini family will call it something different, but I consider it a dam that's going to dam up water onto my property. I'd like that to be reconsidered. I know Kendra last time talked about that it's going to be considered during the engineering phase, but I just don't know how that all works when you have planning phase like this, and then you go to just an acceptance with an engineering without input afterward. So I'd be curious about how that works. They do have a ditch showing on that, but the ditch is on the south side. I don't know why that's not on the north side where all the water flows into that road. So I'd also like them to look at that before you guys consider approving this plat onto the next phases. I don't think that everything has been considered. And also with the Planning Commission, as Lisa said, had a lot of concerns, but the notes do not show that. I would like you guys to look over all that and think about that before you make your decisions and where you guys head with this. I do know that this is an investment for the Carini family, and then the last time I expressed that this is an investment for us too. In this, nobody wins. It's not really about winning or losing, it's about what's best for the city and the surrounding community. So I ask you guys consider that as you make your decisions. That is all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, now any other hands up? Okay,
Mayor,
so
I do not believe so.
Let's move on then to item 8A, which is a Carini plat, preliminary plat.
That is not the beginning of my show. So I'm missing a number of slides. That is slide 6 of my PowerPoint. I don't know what happened to the other slides, but can I drive?
Sure.
Unless you've got them hidden somewhere.
I do not, Kendra. I'm not sure why they're not down there, but I will make it.
I can pull up the email that Kendra sent me earlier today. If there was an operator error, it would have been mine.
Okay,
yeah, I'm just missing like the aerial location map, which is kind of helpful, and the Planning Commission summary.
Yeah. You can just turn the screen over to Kendra, can't you?
Yep, I should have just given you, allowed you to be a presenter, Kendra.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Council. Sorry about the little snafu. You've heard already a little bit from the previous speakers. This is a request to create 4 lots from 2 existing lots in property guided and zoned rural residential. And this is Rolling Hills Road, and this is the lot that was carved off as part of Rolling Hills Acres. There was a lot 1, lot 2, lot 3, lot 4 with the existing house. And then the Karanimi's existing home is back here on this 40-acre piece. And as commonly happens as part of a subdivision, 2 different parcels, 2 or more different parcels, just like in Tavera, there's 4 parcels that are being combined to create that subdivision. That does happen frequently with subdivisions, and that's what's being proposed this evening. The Planning Commission did hold the public hearing, which is the opportunity to give public comments on June 4th. And in addition to the developer, there were 5 residents who spoke on this item with a number of concerns. And there was a letter from the Weifels in the Planning Commission packet, also in your packet tonight. And those same concerns raised by the Weifels this evening were the concerns raised at the Planning Commission. Concerns about the ordinance for private drives and for development rights, concerns about drainage, concerns about the soil quality and the ability to get septics on site. And the commission did have a lengthy discussion. But after reviewing the ordinance standards, the commission did vote 5-0 to recommend approval of the preliminary plat. There are 5 development rights between the 2 parcels, and the existing home on Willow Drive will remain and will retain one of those development rights. The developer would then create 3 new lots off that Rolling Hills Lot 3 and retain 1 development right on the 40-acre Lot 4 that could be subdivided in the future. So again, here's Lot 1, Lot 2, Lot 3, and Lot 4 is a 40-acre parcel with the existing home, and their ghost plat shows a potential future home in the northwest corner of the site. The first 3 lots have access off of Rolling Hills Road, lots 1, 2, and 3, with access via a private drive. And I think, to be fair, the issues with this plat that are raised are as much about the private drive ordinance as they are about the development rights ordinance. And if the council would like to review those at a future date, we certainly could. But it does meet all of the standards for a private drive in the rural residential district. And as such, they will need to create a homeowners association that will manage that private drive. They'll be responsible for snow removal, for grading, for managing the drainage. And there are several additional items that need to be addressed prior to Lot 4 having access to that private drive. Again, that's a future issue, but we've included conditions in the draft resolution to address that. The sites will be served by individual wells and septics, and the locations proposed comply with septic standards. It is our understanding that the applicant has submitted plans to Hennepin County, but we have not yet seen septic approvals. We would need to see Hennepin County's approval of septic sites prior to processing a final plat application to ensure that the lots are in fact buildable. There is an existing trail easement on the east side of the existing Lot 3 and the proposed Lot 3 that will be maintained with the plat. So it needs to be maintained even if Lot 4 eventually has future access. Certainly stormwater management is a big deal with all plats, and it is true that there are still revisions that are required. The engineer's memo is in your packet with a number of conditions. Those final designs need to be approved by the city engineer. Again, before we'll proceed with final plat, they need to be able to show that those drainage issues have been addressed in compliance with city, state, and local, city, state, and watershed rules. There is, as I said, an existing trail, and park dedication will only be taken for the newly created lots. That's 2 lots that will need to pay park dedication. And so with that, we recommend that you move to adopt Resolution 20-47, approving the preliminary plat as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Kendra, can I ask a question about the previous screen, please? Or Ron, may I ask Kendra?
Yep.
Okay. Could you define a dry pond and drainage swale, please?
Would I defer that to the Public Works Director?
Is he here?
I think he is. And I don't want to misspeak because it is important. Is Kevin here tonight, Brad?
Yes, I'm here. So a dry pond is basically, the term dry means it doesn't always hold water. So it's a low area, basin area that would fill up with water during a rain event that then would dry down. Now, that dry pond in itself is part of the stormwater plan, and that hasn't, whether this is a dry pond or there's actually a NERP pond which would have water in it, that hasn't been fully approved. So that's what they initially submitted. But the dry pond would visually look like a grassy bowl that would fill up with water and then drain down. And a swale is just defined as, really a ditch that has grade on it. So it, you know, a swale can take any form and side slope, but really it's basically an area where you convey stormwater. So you kind of control where stormwater goes, and it would have to meet certain standards for erosion control and grade and drainage. So is that helpful?
Yeah, so is when it comes to this specific piece, like, are we talking about, I think I know the answer, but I just want confirmation. Are we talking about specifically the whole area? Or are we only talking about that one piece of property, which wants the 3 houses in the driveway and those type of things?
In terms of what's being treated, or is
no,
that...
in terms of when the stormwater management part of this equation, the dry pond and the drainage swales and the stormwater management, are they specific to the 10-acre plot? Like, are we only looking at the preliminary plat and the stormwater management for that specific plot with the 3 houses, the Karinami addition?
Are you asking, John, are we taking into account surrounding properties? Is that what the real question is?
Yeah.
Yep. So it's a multifaceted question. In terms of water quality treatment, it's just the impervious that's created with this 10-acre property. So the size of the pond and the treatment that's required by the watershed just relates to the new impervious created from this project. Drainage swales, other parts of the stormwater management plan take into account water that enters the property from neighboring properties, as well as what it discharges at. So there's 2 components. There's kind of the hydraulic water flow coming to your site and leaving your site. That's kind of a rate issue. And then there's a water quality issue, which is just how you're treating the new impervious on your specific site. So they're both accounted for in the stormwater management plan.
And in stormwater management, are spring floods part of that equation?
You handle the flooding, yes. I mean, yes, through the state rules and watershed rules. That's where you get into your 2-year, 10-year, 100-year floods. And yes, that is all handled, you know, and then the same rules really generally apply to this site as they would to Vera. They just look differently depending on each site. So they're very specialized to that site. So.
Okay.
Kevin, can I ask a question off that?
Sure.
Was there a stormwater management plan when this original 40 was split into 4 parcels? And if so, how does this new plan for this new 3 parcels on these 12 acres fit into that original plan? Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a good question. In general, this plan would basically have to take into account the new changes they're proposing. So it would kind of, it would, like, if there's any drainage from the old plan, it would parlay into this. So this would have to complement the previous plan. Now, the previous plan had less impervious area, i.e., they weren't building a private road in there. So yeah. The more impervious you have, and depending on what you do and where you are in the property, it triggers different things. So they would have to complement each other, if to answer your question.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question. Kendra, this lot total has 5 building rights, like you'd mentioned. In looking this over, is there how could these 5 property rights be used if they weren't in this format? Or is there any way?
Well, how the 5 building rights would be used on a parcel like this is likely only possible through combination with an adjacent parcel, whether to the north, the east, the west, or the south. The 40-acre would be challenged to get 4 lots on that 40-acre parcel.
Why do you say that?
Just because the back half, I think it would be difficult to get 4 lots on the upland portion on the east side where the driveway access is. And to get to the upland area on the back half would require crossing a wetland and significant wetland fill. But it's, I mean, I haven't done the analysis. It's theoretically possible.
But if you look at that driveway is really long, and there's a lot of area around the driveway that if you look at a aerial topographical map, you could put 3 houses along the driveway right next to the existing. I'm not suggesting we do that, but to say and pretend that that lot can only hold 1 house is folly.
Fair.
I don't know if that sways anybody or if it matters, but I don't want to have it be out in the public that it would be impossible to put more houses on that other piece of property.
From what I looked at and from the discussion that was had during the planning commission, it seemed to me that there was some discussion about adding in another property on the 40 acres, but that it also comes with its unique challenges as well on the northwest section of that lot. But my point in asking the question is, if this lot has 5 property rights and we were to deny this simply because we don't like the way it looks, you're essentially taking something that we've offered to the whole community in our current ordinance standards and saying you can't do it just because we don't like it. And that's just not a basis for which you can make those decisions. I feel like this is a reasonable use, not whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, in my opinion, really isn't all that relevant. In this case, it's a viable use of this land under our current standards. Is that?
Yeah, Brian, I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
I think that's exactly right, Brian, and I think that's exactly what we're dealing with tonight. Is what are our standards right now? Is this meeting those standards? And based on that, we have to treat it accordingly. So, yeah, and I think the issue of whether the 40-acre parcel could accommodate the 4 building rights that it has is maybe pertinent to a future discussion on building rights and that sort of thing. But it's irrelevant for tonight's discussion.
Well, I would also add, I think it's important to note for those that are on the call in concern of this, is that I'm only comfortable moving forward with this because of the conditional elements that are on it. The 17 items that have been brought up and are being laid forth before this final plat can be presented means that the final plat can't be presented if the drainage issues aren't resolved and if the other issues that are listed there are resolved. And so if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't be comfortable with it. I think they're there's significant concerns and they're things that have to be addressed. And I think that the staff and those that will be addressing this, such as the watershed, will be looking at those things. So I don't want to dismiss any of the comments that were made. I think those are relevant, but we can't make a decision to turn this down simply because we don't like it, especially if these other issues are going to be brought up and will be decided based on how they come out.
That's exactly right. We're not giving the final approval here. There's conditions on this preliminary approval and the conditions have to be met. And I think the neighboring properties are right to express their concerns for drainage issues. They should stay on top of it and get as involved as they want to be on it. And hopefully staff and our support will look at these issues and make sure that they're covered. And I have full confidence that that's the case. So.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to kind of echo Brian's comments. I don't like this at all, but we're really bound by the ordinance, the same ordinance that allowed the 40 acres to be split originally into the parcels that are in question. You know, it's one of those things that sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do because that's the way the ordinance is. We can't foresee every situation. And if we could have foreseen this, we probably would have wrote something in the ordinance before. So does the engineering note, it must talk about the private drive and the water from the north, correct? There's talk about, I know there was talk about a culvert, additional culvert in there. Can Kevin talk to that, or Kendra?
It does deal with the offsite drainage. I don't know if Kevin, you have it in front of it. The first drainage comment in the engineer's memo is offsite drainage areas and calculations are required, and that drainage appears to flow over the private road from the north. And so there's some conditions that follow related to that. So certainly I think in response to your question, that's very much on page 1 of their memo.
Yeah, there's no way that this property owner can dam water and keep water back off of his property on existing property, not under the any current ordinance or law in the state of Minnesota, right?
This is Kevin. Yeah, I mean, without pretending to be an attorney, we strongly look at all the surrounding drainage, both upstream and downstream, and apply it to the laws that are out there. So in general, we look to make sure that we maintain that flow and conveyance.
Okay. I just have one other question. When this plot was originally, when this 40 was originally split and then resold, does a developer of that resale have the ability to put covenants on their property to not allow further splitting of land? Is that in the realm for future developments? Doesn't help these people now, but
I think a land developer could establish covenants on any piece of land that could restrict how the land is used, and then buyers choose whether to buy the parcel with those restrictions, provided it's not in violation of any other state or federal laws.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, looking at this from Lisa and Andrew's segment point of view, you know, this is not what they were hoping for. I think I would have assumed that when you've got a unit that 40 acres is divided into 4 10s, that each of those would be one building site, and it does seem pretty crazy to have it work out this way. This is just, well, we need to fix it. Yeah,
Tom, I think we need to back up a little bit here. I think one of the points of our building program and our incentivizing people is to get them to cluster buildings. And you know, in another environment, we would be saying this is a good project because it's preserving all this open space. And so that's the other side of that same coin. So I'm not sure. Let's not throw our building rights program and our clustering and all those programs under the bus here. We maybe don't like the way this is turning out real well, but I think in some cases we incentivize people to do exactly this, is to reserve that open space. Now you can make an argument whether that open space would be reserved anyway because it's wetland, and that's something we should certainly discuss in the future. But we're not. I'm not in favor of us all of a sudden backing off and saying we want all 10 on 40 acres. You're going to have 4 10-acre lots. I think that might be a fine thing, but I don't know if we want to legislate that.
My objection is really just to the sequence of events.
Yeah, and that's it. I agree that it is unfortunate.
You know, it doesn't sound like Lisa and Andrew would have bought that 10 acres if they had known that the lot to the south was going to be.
And I think if they were given assurances that it wouldn't happen, they have some civil rights to go after that. But the city can't get in the middle of that. Yeah. So,
okay. But, you know, I think the covenant idea makes some good sense. That we want clusters. It's good, but we want folks to kind of know what they're getting into as best we can do it. We can't ever guarantee.
As best we can, but quite frankly, people have a right to massage and do things with their land, and there's always an exposure if there's an open field next to you that it's going to have houses on it. And the city's not in a position, nor should it be, to guarantee that it's not going to happen.
And, I mean, sometimes the feeling is if that land staying empty was really important to you, you should have bought it and kept it empty. In this case, you know,
it's always a viable option if you have the capacity to do that. And if you don't, then it's unfortunate, but that's reality.
Can I add one thing before we vote or before we?
You can, John. We're still discussing.
Recommendation. Yeah. Brad, I don't know if you included the picture. Were they ever in the packet, the pictures I sent you this week?
No, they were not.
Okay. Can you please go back to, this is so hard because it's online, the topographical map with the 3 adjacent properties?
The aerial or the topo map?
The topo. Is it that one? That one. Okay, so the people that I went out to the property this week. If you look at the property under discussion with the 3 segregated parcels, and you go 1 parcel to the north with the 2 in the middle, those are the people that spoke tonight, the
Yes.
couple. If you go to the parcel to the north, 1 more, and you look where that, approximately where that 1 is, if you look on the Hennepin County wetland delineation map, there's a wetland there. It's right there. And then if you go onto that property too of the couple that spoke tonight, there's no wetland on their property in the middle there. And then if you go down 1 more and you circle the 2 on the, go right there, circle that 2. On the Hennepin County wetland delineation map, there's a wetland there also. And if you're standing in the middle of the lot with the couple that spoke tonight, there's a clear gully between the wetland on the property to the north of theirs and the wetland on the property to the south of theirs. Like, it's very clear that water will flow right through the middle of their property. And it doesn't have anywhere to go other than that, because you can see on the topographical map that the lots under discussion are 4 to 5 feet lower than the lots to the top that have the 1 on that was circled. The water is going to flow right through their property. So I share the concern that if we run a driveway, which I don't see it on here, but if we run a driveway from Rolling Hills Road to the back of the property under discussion, it's going to dam like 4 feet of water. There's nowhere for the water to go. And so if we put 1 culvert there, that isn't going to do it. And so my concern is that I want that to be carefully looked at.
Well, it's certainly a condition of the preliminary approval is that those issues have to be looked at and resolved.
Yeah, so I agree with you and Brian on the concept, but that's why I asked the question. Is it looked at as aggregate? Is it looked at spring? Is it looked at if we get a 2-incher?
The answer is yeah, it's looked at as, I mean, 90% or 80% of the properties in Corcoran are going to have water issues that have to be looked at. And I think that's what we have engineers for, and that's what their job is. So we can't design it here at the council meeting.
I know, but we've had, how many, in the last 5 years, we've had like 400-year rainfalls. Mm-hmm. And so like the engineering study goes through 100-year rainfalls. And all of a sudden we have one every 3 years, and lot 2 is going to get swamped. So I want not only the engineering, but we have to pay close attention to this situation, or we're going to deal with it every single year. And 1 culvert isn't going to cut the mustard. If you walked out there and you have spent a year of your life looking at creeks and where water flows, you don't have to be on the watershed. I've been on the watershed. It's going to be a problem And even if it passes, I want everybody to pay attention carefully to what's going to happen out here.
And I'm sure the property owners will, and I'm sure staff will as well. So that's their job. That's what we hire them for. So, okay, any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2020-47, which is a preliminary plat with the conditions as stated.
So moved. Dejewski.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a friendly motion to amend his motion. With regards to the engineering memo, when it talks about drainage, it talks about maybe I misread that. I think it was talking about a drainage basin that may require additional. I guess never mind. I'll withdraw my friendly motion.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson?
Aye.
Dejewski?
Aye.
Bodema?
Aye.
And Schultz?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure that some of these highlighted issues will be looked at. I'm comfortable that the staff will do the best job they can, and I certainly encourage the neighbors to stay involved in the process, and it never hurts to have more eyes on it. So thank you everyone for your working through this. Okay, now move on to item 8B, which is a comprehensive plan amendment, rezoning, preliminary plat, and preliminary PUD development plan for Tavera.
Jess has control again. Thank you. That is exactly the item tonight. Next slide, Jess. So some background on the project. In September of last year, you reviewed a sketch plan and directed staff to prepare an EAW. An EAW is an environmental assessment worksheet that identifies potential environmental impacts and identifies mitigation strategies to address them. We did that for a 551 unit concept plan, and that went out for a public comment period. Then on January 23rd of this year, the council issued a resolution declaring no need for an environmental impact statement in EIS, which cleared the way for the project to move forward. Next slide. The screen shows the highlighted area. Again, like the last project, this is a compilation of 4 or 5 different parcels that get combined into a new subdivision called Tavera under this proposal. Next slide. I put the school districts in. I forgot that, I guess. This is in both the Wayzata School District on the east primarily, except for the Tice property, which joins the Dempsey property on the west in the Rockford School District. Next slide. The property is guided low density residential, which is planned for 3 to 5 units per net acre. And it's zoned urban reserve, which is a holding zone until development is proposed. So I think on that slide, I was just outlining the applications, the applications that are involved. A comprehensive plan amendment will bring the Dempsey property into the initial sanitary sewer phase, which will allow us to bring the sewer down from Ravinia and loop it up to the north, ultimately to extend with a loop to the downtown project. And then rezoning the property from urban reserve to planned unit development, and then the preliminary plat and PUD development plan. On May 21st, the Parks and Trails Commission reviewed the parks component of the project and voted 6-0 to recommend approval of that with the changes as recommended by staff. No, thanks, Jess, that was the right slide. And then Planning Commission reviewed this on June 4th. And in addition to the applicant, there were 3 people who spoke at the public hearing on this item. The city also received an email and a letter that were included in the Planning Commission packet and in your packet for this evening. There was a very robust discussion at the Planning Commission, and at the end, the Planning Commission voted 3-2 to recommend approval of all of the items with 3 changes to the PUD resolution: to require cul-de-sac islands on all of the cul-de-sacs. 2 are currently shown. Require a permanent conservation easement over the tree preservation areas, and then identified a couple of different areas in addition to the lots that staff had previously identified as conditions to add additional landscaping. And those conditions are reflected in the draft PUD resolution in front of you tonight. Next slide. It was as Councilmember Schultz knows too well, and others may know now after watching it, it was a late night. And late into the evening, Lennar did speak about some issues that they requested modifications to. The Planning Commission did not make any changes. I wanted to highlight some of these issues because I know Lennar would like to speak to them tonight and at least give you some time to identify them. The Planning Commission, the city engineer is recommending some increase to some streets to accommodate deep utility lines from 50 to 60 feet. And Lennar does not want to do that, but staff does recommend that stay there. They want to talk about a change to what they call the secondary front setback for townhomes. We don't have secondary fronts in our ordinance. If you're on a street, it's a front and it's the same setback. They do not want to provide the cul-de-sac islands in the project. They'd like to talk to the council about allowing grading after preliminary plat approval. Our policy is not to allow it till after final plat approval. They do have some additional issues with the condition about shifting the trails out of the buffer. There are a couple of areas where the trail is in the buffer, which is not allowed. Staff recommends that they move them out of the buffer, but I do think they have some areas where they may not be able to fully move them out of the buffer. In that case, I would recommend that the council consider, rather than filling the wetland to create buffer, to be able to move the trail out, that we allow the trail to be in the buffer in limited areas. And that's something that could be dealt with the PUD final plan approval. They've also want to talk with you tonight about the garage architecture, the 55% rule for single family homes. And I think the other issue is about the deck encroachment into the rear yards that they've requested. So I'm going to highlight most of these issues in my report, but I do know that Lennar has some items that they'd like further discussion on. Next slide. This is a new rendering that we received from Lennar after the Planning Commission that shows the different colors for the different product types. And it's a little hard to see at this scale, but did start to add in some of the additional landscaping. For example, down by the 75-foot lots in the southwest corner, behind those lots there, yep, we had asked that they provide additional landscaping there. So they're starting to show how trees could be added there. Up on the west side of the park, for example, a little more landscaping butting up against the north side of the trail lane homes behind.
Kendra?
Yes.
Can I ask a question on the last slide? You mentioned a 50 feet to 60 foot increase in this in the streets.
Yeah.
It involved utilities and whatever. Can you add some color or clarity to that, please? And what are they normally? Like, what are they in Ravinia, for example?
Yeah, we go to the next slide, Jess. I think that might help. So, I'm talking about right-of-way width, first of all, and our code requires 60-foot right-of-way for 32-foot wide streets and 50-foot right-of-way for 28-foot wide streets. I believe all of the streets outside of the Parkway in Ravinia are 50-foot wide streets. That's been sort of our standard in new developments is 50-foot wide street. It reduces pavement, reduces the amount of stormwater management. This project has 50-foot wide streets except for the entrance coming off 116, which is 80 feet. And then the street, and Kevin, jump in if I forget part of it, but the street that we're saying needs to be widened is the street that doesn't connect, but starts up near Blue Bonnet on the north and comes down to Horseshoe on the west side of the property.
Okay.
And Kendra, that's because of utilities, the need for
Correct.
utilities to go along that, right?
There's deep utilities there.
So we need that additional right of way in order to maintain the utilities.
Oh, so they're already there in the ground.
No, these are where the sewer is going to go, right?
Yeah, so nothing's in the ground today, but as we design the utility plans, engineering is look at it, and that, you know, the deeper you go, the more you need to come out to the sides to be able to have the ability to repair. And so that's why we want the wider right of way for that street. And we continue to believe that that wider right of way is necessary.
Okay, thank you.
So some context for the project, Tavera would be 549 homes on 273 acres roughly. Bellwether, when it's fully built, will be 398 homes on 225 gross acres. And Ravinia will be 448 homes on 279 gross acres. Gross acres is total land area. So when you have wetlands in there, sometimes smaller areas can be more buildable depending on where and how much wetland is. So bear that in mind when I say gross acres. But just to give you some sense of how this compares to other projects in town. Next slide. This is another context slide. This was a quick summary I put together this morning to compare different dimensional requirements in the RSF3 zoning district, which is what we would typically see in the RSF or the low density residential, and comparing it to Ravinia and Tavera. And so in terms of lot size, the 7,500 square foot minimum lot size is pretty consistent with what the lots in Ravinia prior to the addition of the discovery units on the 55-foot lots. This is in the 2003 approvals. We didn't have the 55-foot lots. So those were 7,700. Later in future phases, they did get smaller, but the initial phase was 7,739. And Tavera, the lot sizes vary depending on that lot width. So from 9,000 minimum on the 75-foot lots to a 66 on the 55-foot lots. And so setbacks between Tavera and Ravinia are pretty similar for single family. Again, I'm just looking at single family. In Ravinia, we have 5-foot side yard setbacks. In this project, they heard the council and are maintaining 15 feet separation between buildings with a 7.5-foot side yard setback. 30 foot is the minimum rear yard requirement under the ordinance. Ravinia was allowed 25. Bellwether was allowed 20. And they are asking for 30 feet for the main structure, but an encroachment of 20 down to 20 feet for decks and patios. And so then just a sense of the density, and that's where you can kind of get an idea of how the wetlands really impact the density. Pre-development net density on Ravinia was 3.3 units an acre, and on Tavera, as it's currently drafted, before we finalize everything, is 2.85 units per net acre pre-development. Next slide.
Kendra, can I ask you a question on the comparisons?
Yeah.
Did you have comparisons of the garage size versus the front of the house?
You know, I looked back at the original Ravinia, and to be honest, on the original Ravinia, they said, here's our product types. None of them comply with the 55%, and so we'd like the flexibility, and here's what we'll give you in return. So we really didn't measure at that time back in 2013. So I did not have a comparison.
Did we do any changes throughout the PUD amendments through Ravinia?
Related to the garage space exceeding 55%?
Yeah. I would imagine we did when we went to some of those smaller homes.
Yeah, the one thing that we did do that I can recall, and I believe this is the only change related to that, when Lennar came in with the Ravinia development, their proposal in exchange for more garage space, their proposal that we accepted was, we will not have any garage forward homes in this project. Plus, we'll jazz up the front of the garage. And the council approved that. And then, I don't remember how far into it we were, maybe 17. They came with a new product that they call their Discovery Unit, which is a smaller home with a 2-car garage generally. And it is garage forward. And that actually may comply with the 55%. I can't really remember. But the council did approve an amendment to allow garage forward on the Discovery units in that project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think that's the only.
Kendra, that was a minimum or a minimal garage forward, correct? We talked about only allowing a certain number of feet, if I recall.
I think you're right, Brian. I think it was.
You probably have a better memory than I do of this specifics.
Nice job, Brian. Kendra, I have a comparison question too. So you have this 30 foot, but 20 feet for decks and patios. And I don't know of a single house back there that won't have a deck and patio. I haven't seen them all, but most new houses have a deck and patio at the back. The rear on Ravinia is 25. Does that have a special exception for decks and patios, or is that total including so that's part one. And then we have two kind of themes in this. One is that townhouse area, I think, down in the south. And then the regular homes. And so townhouses, I would assume, are more dense. I would be, well, if you take the townhouses out of the equation, because I think what we're striving for in this is Tavera and Ravinia's comparative, like what does it look, what's the feel? But if we use averages and we throw townhouses into the averages, it sort of skews all the data. Is there something that takes that townhouse data out and just puts in the homes so we can get an idea of what the units per on a gross basis are in just the homes area?
The double homes too, or the twin homes, I should say.
There's 80 twin homes and 134 townhomes. So it's, the comparisons, you're right, Brian, or John, they do kind of fall apart, or not fall apart, but you have to keep that in mind because there's significant differences.
Yeah. Is it fair to say then the houses will have, it seems like then if you use the math that incorporate those two home styles, that it's going to be less dense in the housing of Tavera than Ravinia. Is that accurate? And then so that's one, and then the 20, 25, 30 feet question on the decks and patios. I don't know what our code says about it. Like, does the 30 feet say, in the code, it's 20 feet for decks and patios? And the reason why I asked that question is it's in there for a reason. It's so we don't have, we're trying, especially in this case, we have houses behind this development. And if we have a code specifically for the purpose of having space between a house and then sort of like change that to the decks and patios, I'm sure to the people behind them, the decks and patios feel like the home is right there, and so I want to ask, I guess, how big of is that a waiver, the decks and patios? Because every house is going to have a deck and patio. So
Yes.
is it similar in density on the house part? And what about this decks and patios thing?
So I was trying to cover my bases with the whole wetlands and the property make things different. I would say that it is fair to say that for the single family portions of Tavera, it will feel less dense. And I think it feels less dense because if you look at that site plan, you don't have a lot of areas where you have back-to-back homes like you do in Ravinia, because they're separated in most of the project by streets or woods or wetlands. So we do have that green area north of the entry where we've got some back-to-back homes. And we've got a few up the internal to the site, not to say that there aren't homes back in existing neighborhoods. But I think for those reasons, that shows you kind of how it is a little less dense in the single family portion in comparison to Ravinia, and you get the density up because of the twin homes and the townhomes. That range. And then, you know, the deck issue is tricky, and here's how Lennar explained it at the Planning Commission meeting, is they've got house pads on their site plan. And the house pad, as they've designed it, is frankly enough to accommodate a deck or a patio. But what happens is home buyers come in, and where that deck or patio is, they want to do a 4-season porch. And then they want to do a deck or patio, again, extended beyond that 4-season porch. So
I've done that.
So that's where I think they're finding buyers today are trying to extend that. But that's their request, and you certainly don't have to approve that. You certainly could modify it and to say, I'm willing to approve a reduced setback, but only for at-grade decks and patios, which I guess by definition probably wouldn't be a deck any longer. It would just be a patio. But that's their request, and I believe that's why they're asking for it.
Could we identify that? Sorry, I just
go ahead.
Quick. Could we identify that the 30 feet includes the decks and patios if there's a property behind, you know, right behind them, or can we not be selective like that?
No, you could certainly say I think what you're saying is, could we approve that flexibility where the lots butt up to open space, common open space?
Yeah.
Okay. And you absolutely could modify the condition to that effect.
That's where I was going to go, John, because if you look at it, there isn't that many lots that actually butt up to existing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Well, that's two different things. There's the ones that butt up to existing neighborhoods, then there's the other ones that butt up to other houses in this development. So are we trying to limit both of them, or just the existing other outside of this development houses?
Well, that's a fair point. I think if you're going to be fair to if you're going to apply the rule to the existing neighborhoods, you should probably apply it to the homes that abut other homes within the neighborhood.
Well, with the exception of the ones that are in the neighborhood, know what they're getting into when they buy the home. So.
Well, but you could have somebody that puts an addition on and then puts a deck on,
sure,
you know, 10 years from now.
Yep. Yeah, and I think clearly we should limit it on houses that butt up to the existing neighborhoods. That makes a lot of sense to me, and that's very few houses. There's not a lot of impact there. The one on the in the development itself, I guess we'll have to look at what the council's consensus is on that, because I don't have a strong feeling on that. If I'm buying a house in this development and I know that that's a house behind me that may have a patio and deck coming up within 20 feet of the property, I guess that's my choice.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to make sure we do is to keep this thing where we don't wander around too much is let's get the comments or get the presentations here, take the general comments, then I'd like to go through the 58 specific conditions in here, sheet by sheet, and just so we go through them and then we don't readdress them, get them resolved, and not bouncing around a lot. So keep that in mind as we talk now.
Okay, Jess, would you go on to the next slide then? No. So this map is intended to show the area that's got the pink star in it. That's the Dempsey property. That yellow area will move to a pink area. That's the comprehensive plan amendment. It's a change to the sewer staging plan to allow the entire property to be developed together, which benefits regionally by allowing that sewer extension to be part of the project. So next slide. The rezoning from urban reserve to planned unit development. And as you know, the urban reserve is a holding zone until sewer and water is developed. And then at that time, we would rezone it to a zoning district that is consistent with that underlying land use. And there's a couple different districts that would typically fit. RSF3 is one of them, and that's why we use that for the baseline measure for the PUD standards. Now, a PUD is really contract zoning. And this is more for the audience than for the council, you know this. It's contract zoning. It's a negotiated zoning district where the developer asks for some flexibility, and in return, the city gets other things that we wouldn't be able to get with a straight plat. Witness the previous application. You know, if it meets the code on a plat, you have to approve it. Well, this gives us the ability to negotiate better design or other amenities. So next slide. Again, there are PUD standards in the ordinance, and I just want to highlight the rezoning to PUD doesn't become effective until the PUD final plan is approved. So at a later date, you would approve the rezoning tonight, but if you read the resolution, it's effective upon adoption of the PUD final plan. Just a procedural item, but I wanted to highlight. Next slide. This is the PUD plan. We kind of looked at it earlier, but again, in context, you've got townhomes down in the southeast corner of the site, primarily single family as you wind through the site. At the end of Trail Lane, you've got a small twin home development, and then a twin home development kind of behind that, north of Trail Lane, and then up by where Blue Bonnet connects. So a couple of twin home neighborhoods. And I do refer to villas as single family. They are single family detached homes with association maintenance for snow plowing and lawn mowing, similar to what we have in MI, for example, or in Bellwether. Next slide. So the PUD request in general, I've summarized here. I'm not going to go through it because I know you guys have done your homework, but this is sort of the proposed flexibility and the proposed benefits. Next slide. So the plan includes 265 single-family homes on a mix of 55, 65, and 75-foot lots, and then 70 villas, which are single-family homes with association maintenance on a mix of 55 and 65-foot lots. There are 80 twin home units, meaning 40 buildings, 80 units, and 134 townhomes. Next slide. This table was in your staff report, so I'm not going to read through it, but it highlights some of the areas where flexibility is requested for certain units. I did not highlight, just for the record, I did not highlight the 7.5-foot side yard setback, because really we have in the code is a 10-foot side yard setback on the living side, 5 foot on the garage side, a total of 15 feet between buildings. And I think it gets us there. So we could talk about that, but to my mind, it was a 15-foot separation. So I didn't highlight that. Next slide. Flexibility for townhomes. Single-family homes have a 20-foot front yard setback. Townhomes have a 25-foot front yard setback. And we recommend that that be maintained. And front yard under our ordinance is along any street, it's a front yard. In fact, we recommend that they maintain that 25-foot setback along the perimeter of the site as well, which may occasionally be a side yard. We think that it's important to maintain that along the perimeter of the Tavera site. At the Planning Commission, there was some confusion about base lots and unit lots. And it is a technical piece that came up, and I put it in here, but a base lot, you could have a townhome lot base lot, which wraps around an 8-unit townhome building, and each of those units in the townhome has a unit lot. And really, because the unit lot just mostly goes around the edge of the actual structure with a common wall, when we look at lot sizes, we're really talking about base lots. And there was some confusion about that we probably needed to clarify. So next slide. Design standards, flexibility for the single family villa and twin homes. Again, they are requesting flexibility to allow more than 55% of the front face of the building to be garage. And depending on the unit type and the whether it's a 2, 3, or 4 stall garage, that could be as large as 75% of the building face. And this was a big item at the July 2019 work session. And consensus at the time, not complete agreement, but consensus was that if it was really important to maintain the building separation, and that garage face was important, but there would be consideration given for flexibility with the PUD if there was higher quality architecture without garage forward design. Because of that, in this case, the applicant is not proposing to prohibit garage forward design, but the staff report suggests, and the Planning Commission recommended, that in order to allow that additional face of garage, it would have to be not garage forward. However, I want to note that if it complied with the 55%, we are not currently in the draft resolution saying you couldn't do garage forward. So in those cases, you could do a garage forward house as long as you complied with that 55% max. And there are a couple of units that would likely be able to be garage forward under that standard. So I know this is a big design issue for the council that you probably want to come back to, but that's sort of the high level. Next slide. So these are some examples of the single family architecture. And again, it looks very similar, I think, to a lot of the product in Ravinia. But as we said back in 2013 with Ravinia, it's important to note that the market changes all the time. And these are some examples of products they're building now, but they will have slightly different products as this moves through its 8-year phasing plan. So we're not approving specific single family home products, but this is an example of the kinds of products that they would do and would still be subject to all of the standards in section 1040 of the ordinance, which relate to materials used and percentages and architectural elements. And generally these do appear to comply with that. We don't have the percentages, but they generally do, with the exception of the garage percentage in some of these cases. Next slide. These are some examples of the villas, and villas are one where, again, a little bit smaller house typically. Some of these 2-car garages would comply with the 55% face. I believe the Florence does. This is one that the ones that would be allowed to be garage forward because they comply with that 55% requirement. Again, in any other development, any other subdivision under our code, you can be garage forward as long as you're not more than 55%. And so that's what some of these would be allowed to do. Next slide. These are the twin homes. Examples, again, not final products, but these are 2 examples of twin homes. And these are at 55% of the garage face, but in this case, neither of these are garage forward, which would comply with our draft resolution. Next slide. Garages come up in a couple of other places. This is the first time we've actually used our townhome ordinance. And so looking at the design standards, there are some things in here that we haven't run across before. We have a standard in our code that says a minimum 440 square foot garage is required for townhomes. This is for townhomes only, not for single family homes. And that they must be a minimum of 20 feet wide. The applicant is requesting flexibility to be slightly smaller on the square footage. and on the garage width to go down to 434 square feet and 19 foot wide. That's a pretty big standard garage. Is usually a little less than that, but it's not out of line. It is a little bigger than you would see on a typical subdivision for a standard garage size. We've also got in our code that 25% of the townhome building must be brick or stone. And these townhomes have about 6% on the front and 26% on the ends and sides. No stone proposed on the rear. And as I noted in the staff report, the garage takes up much of the front of a townhome. And so we would support that flexibility with the stone on the side at 26%, provided all the other design criteria are being met. And at this point, I did get yesterday from Lennar a little bit of information and honestly didn't have time to review to ensure compliance, but it generally looks like they would comply with those other criteria. Next slide. These are examples of townhomes, and I believe in the applicant's narrative he mentioned these are similar to the product in Maple Grove on our border across from Lions Park, if any of you had a chance to visit them. So pretty typical townhome, a mix of some wainscoting on the front of stone and then a mix of lap, shake, and board and batten trims above. Next slide. Utilities will be extended from Ravinia to the site at the developer cost, and the city has been working on that extension of Gleason Parkway and the associated utilities extension. The work is expected to begin this fall and could be completed in the spring of 2021. Stormwater is a big deal on every site. On a site this size with this amount of wetlands is complicated. So that is still being reviewed. We've had a number of meetings with the developer's engineer. We are working to resolve those issues, and again, would work through that prior to moving the PUD final plan and final plat forward for compliance. Next slide. Transportation, the developer is responsible for construction of all internal streets, and as I mentioned, it's a mix of 50, 60, and 80-foot right-of-way in the project. There is no connection to Horseshoe or Trail Lane on the east, those existing neighborhoods from the main project. There is on the west side of the project a connection to Horseshoe west of the existing homes on Horseshoe. There are a number of improvements to County Road 116 required for the new entry. There are paving of gravel streets that would happen outside of the scope of the project. Old Settlers Road from Butterworth Lane to Horseshoe Trail from Old Settlers to the east line of the Dempsey property. And there would be a number of improvements to Hackamore, including turn lanes. And as the council knows, Hackamore is a larger project extending from the west of this project all the way over to County Road 101. The city and the city of Medina are working together, but this developer would be responsible for their share of those improvements as outlined in the feasibility study. And then there is an emergency vehicle trail access to Bluebonnet on the north, and that would also have a plan for a future street connection when the property north of this site develops. That would be a through street in the future. And as always is our policy, we are stubbing streets and utilities to adjacent properties on the west should they wish to develop in the future. Next slide. There are a number of wetlands on site. The applicant does generally appear to comply with those wetland requirements, have some conditions to address that. There is floodplain area on the north side of the site, and it will require a letter of map revision. That's a process we go through with FEMA. at the federal level, and that'll be coordinated with the city engineer. There are some shoreland and ditch buffers. We don't talk a lot about ditch buffers, but a few years ago, the governor adopted some new I shouldn't say the governor adopted, but there are some new regulations that require buffers along ditches, and those need to be added to the plat and ensure compliance with those as well. And then natural resources was a really big discussion at the Planning Commission. The plans show 52% woodland preservation, but it's a mix of both the areas identified on our comp plan as ecologically significant and other wooded areas that, while maybe important, weren't identified as ecologically significant. Next slide. This is their tree preservation map. And so the red areas, red and orange areas are the removal, and the yellow and green areas are the preservation, depending on whether it's woodland or ecologically significant areas. And one of the conditions added by the Planning Commission is that those preserved areas need to be under some sort of a conservation easement. We didn't talk a lot about the details, so whether it's truly called a conservation easement or a tree protection easement, some tool to ensure that those trees are protected, not removed, but there's an opportunity to, if there's disease or dead wood, be able to go in and clean them up from a public health standpoint. Next slide. Landscaping, the circled areas are the areas where we recommended that additional landscaping be required to be added, and the Planning Commission beefed that up a little by adding a few more lots. That early slide I showed you, they're already working to add more landscaping. We haven't reviewed in detail, but they are working towards that. They do exceed the landscaping requirement under the current plan, but when they add those, they will be close, probably over 1,000 trees on site. Next slide. Yeah, this is the site plan where you can see in some of those areas I had circled that, well, maybe you can see there's little dots where they're adding trees. It is, I acknowledge, hard to see on the screen. Thanks, Jess, that's helpful, yes, in those areas. Next slide. One of the benefits of the PUD that they're suggesting is providing a gateway sign at the corner of Hackamore and 116. And so at the Planning Commission, they provided these two examples of entrance signs. The left one as an entrance into the development off of 116, and the right one as an entrance sign off of Hackamore. Early design, I mean, just concepts. They're certainly not ready to ask for approval, but generally those complied with our ordinance requirements. And then they said, if you would like, as a PUD benefit, we would build what I call a welcome to Corcoran sign. We've talked about these gateway signs in the past, but have never really talked in any real detail about what those might look like. Here's an example showing the corner with the additional landscaping and a sign with stone monuments and kind of a split rail fence look connecting them at the corner. And I made it too small, so I can't read it, but I think this new sign says welcome to Corcoran, but it may say Tavera Corcoran, I'm not sure. So I think they'd like some feedback from the council about whether that's desirable, and then you could provide direction. We could work through the details with them before the next phase of project. Next slide. Park dedication is a big part of this PUD. This, as the council knows, earlier this year, Three Rivers Park District came to you and talked about refining their Diamond Lake Trail plan. And one of the things that they talked about is maybe moving that regional trail through this project since it was coming forward. And so that's sort of aligned with the off-road trail that sort of on the western edge of our comprehensive plan. As part of this project, Lennar has agreed to work with staff, and they've moved it into the development. And so that would allow that first piece of the trail in Corcoran to be built with this project. When it's a regional trail as opposed to a city trail, it's still in a 20-foot easement, but the trail itself increases from an 8-foot to a 10-foot wide trail. And so that's a condition of approval in the resolution. We've also got on-road trails planned on 116, Horseshoe, and Hackamore in the right-of-way. And in the staff report, I won't go into the detail, we recommended a number of changes to the Parks and Trails plans that the Parks and Trails Commission recommended. And so those are included in the draft resolution. Next slide. The plan does show dedication of a 4-acre public park where the red star is near the entrance. And while a neighborhood park wasn't originally on our comprehensive plan, a development of this size certainly warrants a neighborhood park in our opinion, and the Parks Commission recommended acceptance of that park. And so as part of that dedication, and because it's a PUD, we will be asking them to make some improvements to that park, including a small parking lot, doing the grading, extending the driveway into the park from the public street, and moving the trail, constructing the trail through the park. Those are things that we couldn't typically require with a plat, but are benefits of the PUD. Next slide. Park dedication for single family is 15% of the land area. And so this will be a mix of land and cash. We would accept the roughly 4 acres of park and roughly 2 acres of trail. Final details would come in later. If those are accurate, that would remain 1.8, almost $1.9 million in park dedication to be paid with this project. And that comes in with different phases, so it doesn't all come in immediately. But next slide. This is just a reminder, I think, of what the plan looks like. Next slide. This is the phasing plan. So initially, where you see 116 and Gleason, what was Gleason Parkway, what is now, once you cross 116, called Horseshoe Trail, doesn't connect through to Horseshoe Trail, but comes in and then goes north or south. South of Horseshoe, the new Horseshoe, is phase 1. Which is single family homes and some of the townhomes. And then phase 2 would be the rest of the area south of that in the townhome area, and then some of the single family homes right there. And then the plan would be to come north of Horseshoe for the next 2 phases there. It's an 8-year build out plan, but as we learned in Ravinia, you know, it's all kind of market dependent and things can shift, but this is their vision for today. Next slide. So in summary, the project is consistent with the concept plan in the EAW and is subject to the mitigation strategies that were identified in the EAW. There are a number of conditions in the draft resolution that will result in plan changes. And so the scope of those changes, I don't know, but some of those conditions are fairly significant related to the right-of-way width, some of the setback requirements. And so there would likely be changes when this comes back for the PUD final plan and plat. And that is the next stage. If this is approved this evening, then the next step would be for them to come back with their final plat and their final PUD development plan. And at that stage, we would also have the development agreement, which outlines all of the financial responsibilities of the developer related to the project. Next slide. And that is my abbreviated presentation. Based on that, we are recommending adoption of the following resolutions, which reflect all of the changes from the Planning Commission and the Parks and Trails Commission. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to answer any more questions.
Okay, I think at this time, Paul Tribone wanted to give a short presentation. Maybe we could take that before we get into general discussion. Paul, are you there?
I am here, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yeah, well, yep, yes, we can.
Okay, great. Paul Tabone, Land Entitlement Manager with Lennar. I know we've all talked before. And I just wanted to, I'll try to keep it quick because I know Kendra's Kendra's report was pretty detailed. There's a lot of stuff going on with this proposal. I first want to thank the city for all the work that staff has put in and working with us through this. Also wanted to extend thanks to the Planning Commission and the Parks Commission for their support of the project. And we're excited to get started, and hopefully we can keep everything moving forward this evening. So one thing that I wanted to highlight is that through the concept review from last fall, the EAW, the neighborhood meetings, and getting the Planning Commission's recommendation, we've made multiple attempts to engage city officials, staff, and surrounding residents, and trying to address the main concerns that we heard, which were traffic, water, aesthetics, privacy, and screening, and a couple other ones, but those were kind of the main ones. So as Kendra stated, it's 449 single family homes. We are trying to kind of, I guess, appeal to various ages and incomes of the market. I think I saw on one of her slides talking about lifestyle housing. So kind of looking at more of the entry level, young professional type housing with the townhomes, and then moving up into the single family detached homes. And then ultimately, you know, focusing on an age targeted product with the villa homes and even the twin homes. One thing I wanted to note on the twin homes is I did hear through our extensive conversations last year about garage forward product. And we did take into consideration the garage fronts, and we actually redesigned those. I think that was input from the commission and the council when we were going through a potential product change in Ravinia. So we did take that back to the drawing board, and we redesigned the fronts to have more of a traditional single family home look. However, based on our experiences in Ravinia, we're trying to build in as much flexibility because even as Kendra had noted, you know, the market from 2013 to even 2015 shifted quite a bit. And so we had to adjust to that. We do anticipate an 8-year development build out. I want to stress that's development itself. Obviously home construction comes after that. And we are making a conscious effort to implement land use and housing policies and principles from the newly adopted 2040 comp plan, specifically pertaining to variety. And I mentioned it before, but you know, different stages of life, ages, incomes, while still hitting that minimum density of 3 dwelling units an acre. So Kendra did touch on the PUD flexibility setback or items that we're requesting. Generally, it's flexibility for setbacks, architecture standards, and lot sizes. And so just kind of to touch on the main ones, Kendra and I have talked about these a little bit too. As far as the commission recommended items, the cul-de-sac islands, our preference would be to not install them, but if that's something that the council really wants to see, we could look at that. The primary issue being that they do kind of end up getting ruined and in the middle of the street with some of the plantings that were done in Ravinia, and we tried to learn from that a little bit. So we put 2 of them in where it made sense, but in the typical cul-de-sacs, they get run over a lot. And so we were trying to kind of have a little bit less of a maintenance responsibility for the HOA there. We're fine with working with staff to establish a tree preservation easement area on site for the areas that will be saved. And as Kendra had noted, we're working on enhancing the landscaping plan per commission and staff recommendations. And yeah, we will probably get over 1,000 trees by the time we're done with that. So the additional planning and kind of timing factors for us are the frontages on the townhomes or the secondary frontage. So my understanding, and I hope I say this right, but my understanding is that the typical single family home setbacks are 25 feet in the front and then 20 feet on the secondary front, I believe. And so we would look to try to have that same standard for the townhomes. We view it as a side. The garage is the front, the corner side is the side, and we typically try to plan 20 feet on the side that's not the garage, if that makes sense. We did have our engineer look at trying to extend those out to 25 feet, but we do run into problems with building spacing and we are constrained by the wetlands in that area as well. There's not a lot of room to shift the buildings around. So that was something that I wanted to discuss. We are working to shift the trails out of the buffers as much as possible. I think those are conditions 9 and 40. And we're trying to incorporate the Diamond Lake Regional Trail, you know, kind of looking at what that trail system looks like and how to make that work. I understand that the overall trails will have to be a little bit wider. So we are looking at how that works and seeing how we can incorporate that without running into buffers or having the trails too close to the rear yards or decks or patios. Speaking of decks and patios, I'm happy to answer questions on that, but I think Kendra did a really nice job explaining our rationale behind it. In a lot of cities, there's the ability to have a deck or a patio going into the rear setback as an accessory to the principal structure. In Corcoran, I think it's viewed as the principal structure. And we did run into an issue with one of our communities last year where we did build enough in for an extended covered porch, but then we had customers that wanted to put an additional patio or deck behind that porch. And so that ended up, we had to go get a PUD amendment for that. It wasn't in this community, but it was somewhere else. So we are looking, that's the main reason behind that. I would like to talk about the 55% rule. We're clear on what it means right now, but just wanted to kind of get a little more of an ability to discuss that with the council. And then, let's see, excuse me for a moment. We talked about the right-of-ways, our engineers looking at those. We did have a meeting with Kevin and Kent to discuss where it's appropriate to have those right-of-ways a little bit wider. And so we are trying to work through that with engineering as well. So we do understand the concern for the deeper pipe with that. Our preference would be to keep the right-of-ways at 50 feet as we did in Ravinia, so that we're not having to clip frontages of lots or lose lots due to that. But we are trying to work through that with engineering. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And then probably the last thing that I wanted to note is trying to figure out how we may be able to move ahead with some grading this fall ahead of final plat approval. I understand that's not the city's typical way of doing things. And I can speak to that in a little bit more detail and kind of explain the rationale behind it. But basically, if we can start moving dirt ahead of final plat and based on a finalized grading plan that's been reviewed and approved and kind of is geared off of the preliminary, it puts us in a position to be able to get ahead of ourselves, get ahead of schedule a little bit. And instead of having to grade and put in utilities next spring, we would just be able to have to put in utilities and streets. So it kind of tees us up to be able to get that first phase up and going sooner.
Paul?
Sure, yep.
I'm not sure, is anyone else having a tough time hearing Paul? Or is it just us in the council chamber?
I'm okay.
I'm fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's just here.
I'll try to talk a little.
Well, I think you're okay. I think we're having some battery issues here, so
Actually,
I'll work on it.
Noticed that Mayor Thomas left. I don't know if he's still on or not. Okay, well, I guess I should probably keep going. I don't want to continue without him, but Brad, do you have any thoughts? Should I pause or should I keep going?
Mayor and council and audience, I apologize. Looks like we have a technological issue here. Let's take a brief recess.
Brad, do we want to take a 5-minute break at this hour then so we can use the bathroom too?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll declare a quick 5-minute recess here.
Okay, yeah, the mayor has just declared a 5-minute recess here. We'll be back. Keep everything on, just mute.